All right. Good morning, everybody. Today, we are going to be taking some notes about Congress, kind of like a little more how it's structured. We're going to talk about like the specifics of what they do and how they do it too. But this is more about how it's kind of set up. So while we're going along, I'm wanting you to fill out this little sheet. Um, you can also just take notes if you want to and do this part later. That might be easier rather than trying to flip back and forth between tabs. I'm going to talk about a lot of these questions, but I'm not going to answer every question for you. There's some stuff that I'd like you to look up on your own. So I think it'll be apparent which ones I'm going to answer. And then some of this stuff is just opinion based or it's obvious that it's research based. So over the course of the next 2 days, we'll get this done. And on Friday, I'm going to give you a quiz about on this sheet. So just make sure you're filling that out as you go along and studying that for Friday. So let's talk a little bit about the U.S. Congress. Okay, so I'm not going to give you guys, a huge history lesson here. It's not really the point of what we're doing, but I do want to talk just briefly about the Compromise of 1787. It's why we have the system that we have. So essentially, this boils down to if you were a large state with a lot of people, you wanted representation to be based on population. Um, like when it came to sending people to represent the people to make laws, you wanted to get more people to do that. However, there are 13 states coming together here. All they're pretty used to doing their own thing. So if you're a smaller state, somewhere like Connecticut, you would want your representation to be based on the fact that you're a state. And in the old Articles of Confederation, that was how voting was done. Every state got equal say. So they all wanted different things. So the compromise they come to here, that's the compromise part of this, is that we're going to have three branches of government, which doesn't really have to do with what we're talking about, but that we're going to have a bicameral legislature. Bi meaning two, cameral meaning house, and then legislature meaning like a lawmaking body. So each side essentially gets a little bit of what they want. The big states with a large population get representation based on their population. The smaller states with less population also get representation based on their statehood. There's a lot more that goes into this, including some kind of nasty bits, but that's important to know why we have what we have. So you end up with the House of Representatives, which is based on population. It is much bigger. It has a lot more members. However, it's kind of the lower house. At the end of the day, they have a little less power, especially less power per person because there's so many more of them. And then you have the Senate, which is literally here on the right. The House is here, the Senate is here. And the Senate is just based on statehood. So every state, no matter what, gets two senators. But we'll kind of move forward to talk about the House a little bit more now. So, like I said, the House is based on each state's population. There are several requirements for being a member of the House. And you'll notice that as we kind of move up from House of Representatives to Senator to President, the age requirement goes up, the citizenship requirement goes up, but this is kind of the lowest threshold. So to be in the House of Representatives, to represent people in the House, you have to be at least 25 years old. You have to live in the state that you represent, and you have to have been a U.S. citizen for 7 years. You don't have to be a natural born citizen. You could move here at the age of 50, be a citizen for 7 years, and then still be in the House of Representatives. You can also actually be 25. There's a 25-year-old member of Congress that just got elected right now. So that part, definitely is accurate. And like I said, it's based on the population of your state. So each state is going to have a different amount of members depending on how big the state is from a population perspective. And you can see here in 2010, this stuff changes. So we have, and I'm going to mention this in a second, but there are 435 members of the House. Um, as of right now, that number is fixed. It cannot change. Therefore, every 10 years when we do the census, uh, when populations change in each state, they have to see, like, does this state deserve more representation? Does this state deserve less? And if a state deserves more, that means another state's going to have to give up some representation because we can't just keep adding seats. So here you can see like which states got more representation, which states had to lose it, and which states stayed the same. And we'll also look at how that might change after 2020 because we just had another census. But to kind of talk about that a little more, the census is actually going to determine the number of Congress people for each state. If you don't know what the census is, every year, or every 10 years, sorry, we go out and essentially try to count every single person that lives in the US. And you might think that's like an insanely hard thing to try to do, but it's also something that's been happening for thousands of years. Like if you ever read like the story of the Nativity, that's what Mary and Joseph are going to do. Caesar is taking a census. So like it's been happening for thousands of years that governments have been trying to do this for a lot of different reasons. And in our purposes, one of those reasons is that apportionment that I was talking about. It's trying to figure out, does this state need to have more representation? Does it need to have less? And another kind of unfortunate part of that is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is really just drawing political boundaries to help one party over another. And it is illegal. It shouldn't happen, but it does pretty frequently. Because the boundaries for most states are drawn by state legislatures. So you can imagine what they might do if you have a Republican controlled, say, state legislature or a Democrat controlled state legislature. They're probably going to want to try to draw boundaries that help their political party. And that's typically what they do. I'm going to skip forward just a second to show you kind of what that looks like. So remember, every 10 years, we kind of typically are going to have to change what these boundaries look like, especially if you're getting more. If you're not getting more representatives, you don't. But if you do, you are. So you can see how people would kind of flub the numbers because they're having to create all these new boundaries. So let's say you've got 50 people and 60% of them are voting blue, 40% tend to vote red. You want all their voices to be heard. You want them all to have representation. And there are a lot of ways you could draw lines to make it fair. So we could have 3 totally blue districts, 2 totally red districts. That would seem a little crazy because you wouldn't think that everyone that thought that way would just be living in the same districts. But at the end of the day, the representation would be fair. Everyone would get to have their voice heard in government. You could also draw the lines like you see here. They're very compact. They look like they make sense, but they are certainly not fair because you end up with 5 blue districts and no red districts. And you can see that they've pretty much been drawn to eliminate the people in red's voices. Even though they all vote and think a certain way, they're not having their voice heard in government because they're not getting representation because the districts have been drawn unfairly. It could also happen that you could draw districts in a really weird way that doesn't even look like it makes sense. And that could also be unfair. As you can see here, the people that drew these lines tried to put as much blue as they could into each district. And they did that so that into these 2 districts, I'm sorry. And they did that so that the other districts could have more red. So they sacrificed 2 districts. They're like, we know these are going to go blue anyway, but that way we'll have 3 red districts. And even though there are less people who vote red over here, they have more representation. So that, in a nutshell, is gerrymandering. It's just drawing lines to look unfair. And I'm going to show you an example from our own state right now. This is not our current lines. But it was at one point in time. Our state, like a lot of other states, have had issues with gerrymandering. And here, I just want you to pay attention to the 12th district. You can barely see it here, but it's magnified here. You can see all the cities that are in this district. High Point, Greensboro is also in there. Winston-Salem, Charlotte, and on smaller scale, Thomasville, Lexington, Salisbury. But the point is, major cities were all put into this district. Charlotte, the biggest city in our state. Greensboro, I think the third biggest city in our state. Winston-Salem, the fourth biggest city in our state. One thing to note is that these big cities tend to vote Democrat. So why put them on the same district? Pretty much so that we could have lines like this. I just want to preface, or really, I guess I've already said it, so kind of post say it after this. This is not something that's like exclusive to Republicans. In our case, in our state, at this point in time, these lines were drawn by Republicans who are trying to kind of limit the votes of Democrats. But at other times, it's been Democrats doing the same thing. In other states, currently, it's Democrats doing the same thing. This is something that's done by both parties to try to gain an advantage for their party. And below this, you can see our districts now. Our districts have changed several times since this map that I showed you. There was actually a lawsuit in 2018 that forced our districts to be redrawn. There was another suit last year by Democrats that were saying, we still don't think the districts are fair, that a judge shot down. So these are our current districts. And actually, you'll notice if you're later when you're looking up who your representatives are, our representative is going to change. It was a guy named Mark Walker, but they've redrawn our district since then. And if you're living in Randolph County, at least, and we were in the 6th district in Randolph County, but we're not anymore. So he essentially just retired, because if he was still going to run for the 6th district, he'd have to run in Guilford County, which would be a lot tougher for a Republican representative to do. So he's getting a new job. Now our representative is going to be a guy called Ted Budd, if you live in this district, and he has already had his job, but now he's just representing different people, but he got reelected. And because we've had a census this year, it's going to change again. So we're probably going to get another representative in Congress, and they'll have to redraw these lines all over again. But one thing I just want to point out before I leave these maps is that you can see like District 3 is enormous. District 1 is enormous. And then like District 12 is tiny. But they're drawn that way because it's based on population. So about the same amount of people live here as do here. It's not about the size of the land, it's about the amount of people living there. And roughly, for each representative roughly represents about 700,000 people. So you can, and that changes state by state. It's not perfectly accurate, but in general in the United States, that's how much a representative is representing in these little areas. They represent about 700,000 people, probably a little more than that, really. So going back to the rest of this, now that we hopefully have a hold on what gerrymandering is, just want to make it clear that each member represents one district of Congress. So if you are the person that represents the 13th district, you represent the people that live here in gray. You do not represent the entire state. You just represent these people. And as far as the federal government goes, these are kind of your closest contact to the federal government. They're closest to the people because they represent such a small area. When it comes to the Senate, they're going to represent the entire state. But for congressional representatives, they only represent this tiny area. And a lot of times that means that congressional representatives are much more likely to like really speak their mind or really say some things that maybe not everyone would agree with, because it tends to be that people in these districts, which are smaller than the whole state, might agree more with their representative than they would with their senator, who's going to tend to have to be a little more diplomatic in how they speak, because they're representing a lot more people that have a lot more different views. Although that can be the case for congressional representatives as well. It just tends to be the case that you'll see congressional representatives maybe saying some things that senators might not. The last little thing from this that I need you to know, you're going to hear the word constituents a lot as we go through. When we say constituents, we're just talking about the people that a politician represents. So people that a congressional representative might represent, people that a senator might represent, constituents. Here, I know it's a little blurry, but you can kind of see what they think is going to happen with new congressional appointment. So they think we're going to get one more congressperson, so we're going to have to redraw all these lines again. State legislatures will. You can see many other states won't change at all. You can see other states will get one. Some might lose some, but that happens every 10 years. Okay, so House terms. Another thing that's going to be on your sheet that you definitely need to have down. If you're in the House of Representatives, you are elected to 2-year terms. So you get elected every 2 years. It doesn't seem like a lot of time, and it's not. A lot of people kind of joke that people in the House start campaigning for reelection as soon as they get put into the House. And a lot of people have a problem with that, especially because these people can be elected an unlimited amount of times. You can live to be 400 years old and just keep running your whole life if you want to. Only science, I guess, would limit you at that point. A lot of people think it might be a good idea to have term limits, but there also might be problems with that. Like, for example, it might take these people a while to learn how to do their job. And by the time they've really got a hold on how to do it, then they've been limited and they're done. So there are positives and negatives to both sides of that, but it is what it is. You can have your own opinion. There are, I think I've already mentioned this, 435 total members of Congress. They are represented in each state in the United States, and in Washington, D.C., but it's based on population. So not every state has the same amount of people in Congress. I can tell you, you'll have to look up the number, but California has the most. I think it's 53. And then several states are tied for last and only have one representative in Congress. Some of them don't really even have enough people to get up to that average number of 740,000 or whatever it is. I told you roughly 700,000, but it's slightly more than that, but you don't really need to know that. Moving on. The House and the Senate both have kind of individual powers. They have some powers together too, but we're going to talk a little bit about what the House can do. So appropriation bills. So essentially, if there's anything that deals with creating revenue, dealing with money, if you're going to make a bill about that, it has to start in the House. It can't start in the Senate. Another thing that you might have heard recently in all the coverage is they pick the winner of the presidency if there's a tie. So you might know, and we're going to talk about this later when we talk about the presidency, but to win the presidency, you have to get 538 electoral votes. So in order to win, you have to have more than half of that. So you have to get to 270. However, it's possible for the candidates to tie on 269. And it has happened before. Not on that exact number, but a tie has happened before. One example of that is John Quincy Adams versus Andrew Jackson. They tied, and then the House picked John Quincy Adams. So in very rare situations, the House can pick the president. And I would guess that if this time around that had happened, they would have picked Joe Biden because the House is majority Democrat at this point in time. Another thing I'll keep kind of referencing, the House begins the impeachment process. And we saw that last year too. And I'm going to keep talking about this when I get to the Senate, but we've had 3 presidents be impeached. But, I think I spelled that wrong, but oh well. We've had none convicted. So last year, we had a president be impeached. Donald Trump was impeached. That just means that the House, if you think about it, if you ever watch like Law and Order and you see like there's a grand jury and they'll say like there's enough evidence to say that you should be charged with this crime or tried for this crime, and then there's a jury later at the actual trial that determines your guilt or innocence. That's kind of how this process works. The House is like a grand jury. They say like we're going to charge the president or another member of government with this crime. Typically, we're talking about the president, though. And the Senate is actually going to hold the trial and decide whether to convict the president. So last year, I told my class, like when all that started, I was like, I bet the president will be impeached, and then I bet he will be not convicted. The reason for that was the House is majority Democrat and the Senate is majority Republican. So kind of regardless of the facts of the case, it was kind of in both parties' interest. It was in the Democrats' interest to get the president out. It was in the Republicans' interest to keep him in. So that's what happened. So impeachment starts in the House, and you are impeached even if you aren't convicted. So 3 presidents have been impeached, none are convicted, and then it ends. It's tried in the Senate. Then what do we have next? We got a couple more, and then I'm going to cut you loose for today. So we're going to talk about the Senate just a little bit. The Senate's requirements, or senators, are based on statehood. So every state gets 2, no matter where you are. If you're in California, even though you're huge population-wise, you get 2 senators. If you live in Wyoming, which is very tiny when it comes to population, you get 2 senators. North Carolina gets 2, Georgia gets 2, Hawaii gets 2. Everybody gets 2, no matter what. But you have to be a state. So like DC, even though it has a lot of people and it gets representatives in the House, does not get a senator or 2 senators. You have to be a state. The requirements for being a senator, they've gone up. You can see that they jump up a little bit. So 30 years old, 5 years older, you still have to live in the state you represent, and you still have to be a citizen for 9 years. So that requirement has kind of gone up too for a senator. The Senate also has longer terms. You get 6 years to be in the Senate. So you're not kind of like already trying to get reelected as soon as you get into office. So they're also kind of staggered, and I wish I had like a whiteboard so I could kind of put that in a visual display, but essentially they're getting elected in different years. So for example, this year we elected, I think we reelected Thom Tillis. It's like we haven't counted all the votes necessarily yet, but I don't think there's really any way for Cal Cunningham to win, and Thom Tillis has declared victory. So we reelected him. He'll be our senator until 2026. But we also have Richard Burr, and he is going to retire, but his term is over in 2022. So they try to never have it to where a state is reelecting 2 senators at once, although that is happening currently in Georgia, but that's kind of a special situation. Normally they're staggered. And like I said, there are 2 members for every state, so 100 members total because we have 50 states. And just like the House, you can serve for as long as you can get reelected. You can serve for your whole life. Strom Thurmond here served 48 years, 8 terms. Pretty crazy. The last little thing that I mentioned, and we're going to come back and talk about this tomorrow, the reason why stuff like this happens is it's very, very difficult to get incumbents out of office. They have a lot of advantages, name recognition, kind of spending power. You can already talk about what you've done, and a couple of other advantages we're going to talk about. And then last but not least, I'm not going to play the video on here, but you can watch this little video that has a senator filibustering. That's the thing that I'm going to kind of let you look up on your own when it comes to limit of debates. But essentially in the House, you're much more limited in how you can talk. They truly try to limit how much time you have to discuss certain issues because there are so many people in the House. In the Senate, the rules are slightly different, and you can do this thing called filibustering if you really don't want something to go through. And there are limits on it too that I'm going to kind of let you look up. But essentially what it is kind of talking endlessly to delay a vote or prevent something from happening. So you can watch this little video of this guy. It's not 12 hours long, but it's in filibustering for 12 hours. They kind of reduce it to like 3 minutes. It's kind of a fun little watch if you want to do that. So the rest of this, I didn't want to just kind of go all the way through today. I didn't in my regular classes either. So I'm going to stop here. We'll do the rest tomorrow. And that's it. So I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.